Pull out those remotes and turn up that volume. It's time to talk about television. Hello everyone, and today, this happened.
Can I have a large pepperoni bacon?
Alright boys, I'm gonna look for you. I'll come by if you guys want to. He's there. Or you have to keep this on there. Alright.
He's gonna have
Okay,
yeah, 2 cans. Make sure it don't got bone in it.
You know, I remember when I was a kid how me, Corey, and Gorman would gather together in the living room and we'd fix popcorn and get soda and just watch that flickering screen all through the night. We'd just sit there and watch cartoons and crime shows, and I am actually lying. We did not have television growing up. And, you know, we just pretty much just sat around and I guess we just played with twigs and stones all the time. But as I got older into my teenage years, I did end up discovering television. And I ended up making my own sort of television show on the internet, The Seth Lewis Show. And that's been running for 230 some episodes now, and it's doing great. I'm getting favorable reviews, a big audience. And I thought, you know what? Maybe I should decide on what my 5 favorite television shows are, since I'm such an expert with it. So, here they are, and please, I ask you, don't change the dial, don't grab the remote, you're going to enjoy this. I know that I might not seem like the kind of guy that likes a show like Dexter, but I confess that I am. If you're not familiar with the show, it's about a serial killer who goes around, and he's also a cop too, but he finds these people that are killers and he kills them, and he only murders murderers. And I won't deny that I understand why people would find this show controversial, and usually I try to stay away from controversial stuff. I won't watch controversial television or movies. I won't read controversial books. And the reason is because I just don't want to be that person that ends up destroying the world from his own stupidity. I try to be aware of other people's feelings. But I have to say that Dexter is a pretty good story. There's a pretty good plot line, and I love the characters. I love Dexter, and I love his sister. And the only real complaint I have about it is it's not really a narrative formula. If you want to understand what's going on in Dexter, you're going to have to watch every single episode in a row. You're going to have to watch it one by one. You can't watch them all separately, or you won't know what's going on. And I'll also admit that some of the later seasons sort of dropped off. But other than that, I will admit that Dexter is a killer good time. Sometimes in life you want to go to a simpler place. A place where there are no worries. A place sort of like Mayberry. If you're not familiar with this show, it's about this sheriff by the name of Andy Taylor, and he lives in this peaceful town known as Mayberry. And you know, that's actually pretty much it. He has some hijinks with his deputy, Barney Fife, and he has a son named Opie that he raises, and that's the whole show. And, you know, growing up as a kid, we used to love to watch this show. I mean, we didn't watch many television shows growing up because we didn't have a TV, but we did have a VHS tape player, and we had the television itself, so we could, like, watch episodes of the Andy Griffith Show, and I would just watch and rewatch these episodes. And now that I'm older, I actually appreciate the show even more. The storylines, the plots are very simple. They're nothing really that complex, but they're very heartfelt, and they come up with some really interesting ideas, like exploding goats, cows wearing shoes, and of course, you can't even talk about the Andy Griffith Show without talking about the characters, which I think is the main triumph of this show. From Otis, to Andy, to Opie, and of course, Deputy Barney Fife, which may be one of the greatest characters of all time, at the very least in the top 5. Basically, in my opinion, he made the show. He's the one that everybody remembers. If I did have one complaint about this show, it would basically be that sometimes the episodes weren't good. Some of the plot lines could be bad, like Andy's aunt buying a wig or something like that. And of course, when Barney Fife left the show, it began to deteriorate. But I will admit that sometimes it is nice just to go to that quiet place called Mayberry. I never thought that my mom would like a show like she likes the Andy Griffith Show. That was until a show called Downton Abbey came out. And it became my mom's favorite show of all time and my third favorite show. And believe me, it is really hard for me to call this my third favorite show. But if you're not familiar with the story, it's about the Crawley family and their lives, and also the lives of the people that work for them. And what I really admire about this show is how it's so intriguing, how it's able to keep you coming back episode after episode. And of course, all the characters are wonderful. They're very real people. They're not good, they're not bad, they're really just like us. And also, the show has one of the greatest season finales, possibly of all time. I had one complaint about this show. I would say that it does follow a narrative formula, and that can be hard for a TV audience. You know, you can't just, like, watch just one episode randomly. You really just have to buy it on DVD and watch one episode after another. But either than that, it is sometimes nice to just take a trip down to Downton Abbey. So, for number 2, I want to make a statement. I think that technically, The Twilight Zone is the greatest television show of all time. If I were going to make a list of what the whole entire world's favorite television show was, Twilight Zone would be number 1. Yes, I do think it's better than Game of Thrones, because every single episode is just groundbreaking. It was sort of like the Citizen Kane of TV. And, you know, the stories really manage to capture your heart each and every time, and the best part about it is, you don't have to tune in weekly to watch it. You can watch one episode and know what's going on, the stories, and I know that it's just a different narrative structure for TV. Should I judge a show on the fact that it just is doing a different formula from other shows? I do. I know that you shouldn't do that, but I am a critic that will do that. And I think that that's the nice thing about The Twilight Zone. You can just sit down and watch an episode, and you don't have to know what happened in the other seasons. But anyways, if you're not familiar with the show, basically just weird stuff happens. There's really no way of explaining it better than that. Weird stuff happens on this show. Stuff that just doesn't make sense, that doesn't follow the normal rules. And I have to admit, I have a little bit of a weakness for that sort of stuff. I think people can be a little bit too just basically following reality and doing what reality tells you to do. I am not that kind of person. I kind of like to be a little bit more mischievous than that and sort of break the rules. I guess that's just the kind of guy I am. But yes, I don't even really have any complaints really about The Twilight Zone, except maybe there were a few bad episodes along the way. But you barely notice them just because it all falls in the same kind of world of The Twilight Zone, and even their worst episode, you're just kind of glad to watch because it's a part of The Twilight Zone, and you just can't get enough of that world.
So stick with us, 'cause Phineas and Ferb are gonna do it all.
I'll admit that it's a bit odd for me to say that an animated show is my favorite show of all time. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love stuff like the Looney Tunes and Mickey Mouse, but it wouldn't be like one of my favorite things. But an animated show did manage to connect with me, and that show was Phineas and Ferb. So, if you're not familiar with the story, it's about these two creative boys named Phineas and Ferb, and they create all these inventions, and they do all these wacky things. And there's also this side plot about this secret agent platypus who's always thwarting this evil genius. It's actually kind of silly, to be honest. But I really like a lot of things about this show. I love the characters, Phineas, Ferb, Perry, Doofenshmirtz. And the stories are all so creative and ingenious, and really, there isn't any particular episode that I do not like. There isn't any point in the show that I thought it was beginning to deteriorate. If I had one complaint about this show, it would be that I guess the same thing happens pretty much every episode. But at the same time, I will also admit that you never really get bored of that formula, so it's not really a complaint. All in all, I will say that it's just marvelous to spend some time with Phineas and Ferb for a while, and I honestly could spend my whole summer with them. The only question I have left is, how does Phineas sneeze? I mean, he has a triangle-shaped head, so if he, like, sneezes, I can just imagine his brain just popping out of his head. I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about it too much.
So stick with us, cause Phineas and Ferb are gonna do it all.
And that is the definite list of the greatest television shows of all time. And please, if you have an opinion about this, if you, like, completely disagreed with my list and, like, why did you put that as number 1, why did you put that as number 2, please leave a comment below, tell me what you think is the greatest television show of all time. But for me, that is my personal favorites, my opinion. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and see what else is on. Oh, and by the way, think big, think differently.